civilian. Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, and Climate Change, joined with the Committee on Finance and the Committee on Sustainable Development Goals, Innovation, and Futures Thinking, is hereby called to order. Good morning and welcome to this public hearing. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Subiri. Nandiyan si Senator Subiri.
Good morning, ma'am. Good
Yes.
morning.
Okay. Who is one of the authors of the two bills which we are discussing today. We are discussing Senate Bill number 2078, authored by myself, and Senate Bill 2079, authored by Senator Subiri. Okay. And these are revised Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act. And of course, the privileged speech which I delivered during the celebration of the wildlife, conservation of, and protection of wildlife in the Philippines. Okay. May iba pang senador, it's only Senator Subiri. At this point, let me now recognize our committee secretary, Maria Clarinda Mendoza, to acknowledge our resource persons and other invited guests.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. The Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, together with the Committees on Finance and on Sustainable Development Goals, Innovation, and Futures Thinking, would like to acknowledge the following resource persons. From the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, we have Undersecretary Edilberto Leonardo, Director of the Biodiversity Management Bureau, together with Ms. Amelita Ortiz, Assistant Director, and Attorney Teresa Tenazas, Chief of the Wildlife Resource Division, and also Head of Legal Unit. From the Forest Management Bureau, we have Forester Nelisa Maria Rocas. From the Ecosystem Research and Development Bureau, we have Dr. Simplicia A. Pasicolan, Chief Science Research Specialist. From the Department of Agriculture, we have Undersecretary Cheryl Marie Natividad Caballero. From the Office of the Undersecretary for Agri-Industrialization and Fisheries, together with Dr. Ildrin Morales, Director of the Bureau of Animal Industry. From the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, we have Commodore Eduardo Gongona. From the National Fisheries Research and Development Institute, we have Dr. Lilian Garcia, the Acting Executive Director. From the Department of the Interior and Local Government, we have invited Undersecretary Rico Judge Janvier Echeverry and Assistant Secretary Odilon Pasaraba. From the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development, we have Executive Director Teodoro Jose Mata. From the National Museum, we have Director Jeremy Barnes. From the Philippine Coast Guard, we have Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander Grace Campos of the Marine Science Investigation Force, and together with Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander Cheryl Boblo. She's the Executive Secretary for the National Operations Center for Oil Pollution and Plans and Programs Officer. From the Philippine National Police, we have Police Brigadier General Franco Simborio, Deputy Director for Operations. From National Bureau of Investigation, we have Senior Agent Abner Texon. From the Philippine Ports Authority, we have Attorney Ferdinand Texon of the Legal Services Department. From the Office of Transportation Security, we have Attorney Sharina Flor Cacha Fermin of Legal Service. From the Philippine Center on Transnational Crime, we have Police Colonel Cornelio Salinas. From the Office of the Special Envoy on Transnational Crime, we have Ambassador Bruce Concepcion. From the League of Provinces of the Philippines, we have Ms. Angelica Sanchez, Director of the Policy Development. From the University of the Philippines, Visayas, we have Dr. Harold Monteclaro, Vice Chancellor for Research and Extension. From From the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, we have Executive Director Teresa Mundita Lim. From the Haribon Foundation, we have Mr. Sam Pedragosa, Policy and Advocacy Officer. From Tanggol Kalikasan, we have Attorney Fitzillian Palmieri, staff lawyer. From the Philippine Native Plants Conservation Society, we have Mr. George Yao. From the Philippine Orchid Society, we have Mr. Jose Marie Lacandula. From the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines, we have Attorney Jennifer Ramos. That is all, Madam Chair. And we also would like to acknowledge the presence of former BIFAR Director, Asis Perez. Good morning, sir. That is all, Madam Chair.
I think he's representing an NGO. Acknowledge the NGO. Di ba, Asis, may NGO ka? We cannot hear you. Walang sound.
I'm representing the ADBG project, ma'am. That's
Okay.
helping PNR develop the law, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But you have an NGO. What is the name of your NGO?
Where we have I'm working with Togon Kabuhayan, ma'am. We are convening that group for livelihood assistance.
Okay, thank you.
From the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines, we have Attorney Jennifer
Ano yun?
Ramos. That is my chair.
Who is talking? Ang gulo talaga nitong sound natin. Who is talking? Itong sound ng Senate magulo eh. Oh. At today's hearing, we are going to tackle the following bills on wildlife conservation. Senate Bill number 2078, entitled An Act Strengthening the Wildlife Conservation and Protection Mechanism in the Philippines, amending for this purpose Republic Act number 9147, otherwise known as the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act, providing funds therefore and for other purposes. Authored by yours truly, and Senate Bill 2079, entitled An Act Providing for a Revised Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, authored by Senator Subiri. 20 years ago, in July 2001, Republic Act number 9147, or the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act, was passed into law. It was pursued in compliance with the obligation of the Philippines as a signatory to the CITES, or the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, or the CITES. RA number 9147 is the environmental policy enabling the Philippine government to manage and conserve the wildlife resources of the country comprehensively. RA 9147 included provisions on the following conservation guidelines on the collection, possession, transport, and breeding or propagation of wildlife, the conduct of bioprospecting or scientific researches, the issuance of the pertinent permits with corresponding fees, determination of threatened wildlife species to be categorized as critically endangered, vulnerable, or other accepted categories, the establishment of critical habitats, the list of illegal acts that are considered detrimental to wildlife with corresponding penalties to perpetrators, the seizure of wildlife in illegal trade, the establishment of a wildlife management fund, national wildlife research centers, wildlife rescue centers, wildlife monitoring units, botanical gardens, and zoological parks. Through the years, the Philippine enforcement authorities were able to apprehend perpetrators of wildlife offenses and or confiscate the illegally traded wildlife species. But the illegal wild trade persisted even during this pandemic, as shown by many arrests and wildlife confiscation, I have monitored on the news. But these were just wildlife crimes that were detected. Many illegal wildlife trade happen every day undetected, and the people behind it remain unapprehended. Their trade have been easier with the use of modern technology and some with the help of social media. The incidence of wildlife crimes has evolved and grown. The violators have become more equipped, organized, and syndicated. The trade and transport of wildlife species have become wide scale and transnational in nature. There are studies suggesting that globally, the illegal wildlife trade is the fourth largest illegal trade after drugs, arms, and human trafficking. Thus, we need to give more teeth, so to speak, to the law to help enforcement authorities also to apprehend violators. Moreover, as candidly observed by one of the wildlife authority regulators, the penalties under RA 9147 are outdated and are like mere slaps on the wrist when compared to the severity of the actions of the perpetrators, particularly those involved in large scale illegal wildlife trade and wildlife trafficking, which have yet to be defined and included as offenses as being proposed by the Senate bills. Further, the emergence of the COVID pandemic made us realize the importance of strengthening the conservation of our wildlife and their habitat. It is constant exploitation of wild animals and their habitats, mostly through human action, that raise the risk of zoonotic diseases transmission or the transmission of disease from animal to human. The interaction of humans and wild animals is greatly increased in cases of illegal wildlife trade. There were studies suggesting that COVID-19 virus may have originated from bats and that the first people infected were traders in bat meat who may have subsequently visited the Yunnan seafood market where the virus spread and was first traced. Lastly, we have to be proactive and work double time when it comes to wildlife conservation because of our country's precarious state of being a biodiversity hotspot. Meaning, while the Philippines has one of the greatest concentration of wildlife species in the world, we are one of the 17, we are experiencing rapid loss of many of our wildlife, with some of them being pushed to extinction or their survival are endangered or threatened due to escalating human activities, habitat loss, and climate change. Senate Bills 2078 and 2079 wish to fortify the mechanism in place to afford better conservation and protection of our wildlife resources and provide penalties that will effectively serve as deterrent against the threats confronting our wildlife species, including, of course, the illegal wildlife trade. With that, I hope we will have a productive discussion on the wildlife bills today. And I want to hear also the opening statement of Senator Subiri. May we recognize now Senator Subiri.
Thank you very much, Ma'am. Thank you very much, Chairperson Cynthia, Ma'am Cynthia. First of all, I'd like to greet everyone here today, all our fellow eco warriors that want to pass this measure to strengthen our wildlife conservation. Since the enactment of Republic Act 9147, otherwise known as the Wildlife Resource Conservation Protection Act, or with the short title of Wildlife Act in 2001, which this representation principally authored when I was in the House of Representatives, a lot has happened in the Philippine wildlife conservation. There have been many positive developments, but there have also been setbacks in our wildlife conservation and protection efforts. Wildlife poachers and smugglers, as mentioned earlier by our chairperson, have become innovative and were able to continue to do their illicit trade, partly due to the lower fines and penalties provided in the existing law. 20 years is a long time, so the The fines that we had proposed 20 years ago may have been high then, but I think are quite low now. Their existence continues to be threatened by overexploitation, habitat degradation, fragmentation, as well as introduction of invasive alien species, pollution, and climate change. The illegal wildlife trade brings target species closer to extinction, and the illegal collection of wildlife genetic resources deprive the Filipinos of monetary benefits from the development of products and technologies from these natural treasures. 20 years of implementation, the Wildlife Act is ripe for further strengthening and improvement based on the collective experiences of government regulators, law enforcement agencies, volunteers, non-government organizations, scientists and researchers, conservationists, local government units, and legitimate wildlife breeders, traders, and hobbyists. Among others, the imposition of stronger and more specific penalties is needed to enhance the deterrent effect, to remove the legal loopholes exploited by illegal wildlife collectors and traders. This representation is not only active in legislation of wildlife conservation and protection. I'm also involved in actual wildlife conservation and protection projects. And for a long time, I was the president of the Catala Foundation, which is engaged in situ conservation and protection of the Philippine cockatoo, or the red-vented cockatoo in Rasa Island in Nara, Palawan. I'm also involved with the Philippine Deer Foundation, and we also run a rescue center here in Bukidnon. And just recently, we released, together with the Philippine Eagle Foundation, a rescued Philippine eagle in Bukidnon. It is therefore high time that the Wildlife Act be updated to comply or be consistent with Philippine treaty obligations concerning wildlife under multilateral agreements such as the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, or CITES, as well as the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, and Convention of Migratory Species. And so therefore, Madam Chair, I will not delay the proceeding any further. I urge our colleagues and all our resource persons to support these measures that are on the table today. Maraming salamat, Madam Chair, and I commit also, Madam Chair, as your majority leader, that we will, once the committee report is out, take up po natin as a priority measure po ito for the next 2 months. Thank you, Madam
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Senator Subiri. There are 4 leading government agencies who are in the forefront of protecting our wildlife resources. They are the Department of Environment and Natural Resources Biodiversity Management Bureau, the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, or BFAR, of the Department of Agriculture, the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development, and the other one is the Bangsamoro government for the Bangsamoro region. So we would like to hear hear their presentation one by one. So we call now on the DNR Biodiversity Management Bureau, represented by Yusek Edilberto Leonardo, the head of the Bureau, to make the presentation.
Okay. No, okay. Ibalik mo lang muna.
Ibalik ko po. Video sa saan?
Ako mag-share. Greetings to Honorable Senator Cynthia Aguilar Villar, ma'am. Honorable Senator Juan Miguel Fernandez Zubiri, sir. Committee members and secretariat. Local government units virtually present. Colleagues from different agencies, other law enforcement agencies, guests from academe, NGOs, and all participants in today's hearing. Good morning. Allow me to share my presentation. Share.
Paliitin mo na ako, Dayan.
Sa taas.
Okay. Where's it, no? Okay. The Philippines is one of the world's 17 mega diverse countries, which collectively host two-thirds of the Earth's biodiversity. It harbors one of the highest concentration of unique wildlife species in the world. Yet, it is also a biodiversity hotspot with high levels of threats from habitat loss, invasive alien species, climate change, pollution, and overexploitation. Second to habitat loss is the illegal wildlife trade, driving the world's most threatened species closer to extinction. It also poses grave risk to human health. Rising demand for wildlife, their byproducts and derivatives sold as pets, status items, curiosity and medicinal ingredients has exploded the trade into a multi-million dollar industry, estimated to be worth up to 10 billion, up to 23 billion per year, making it the fourth most lucrative global crime after drugs, arms, and human trafficking. In the Philippines, illegal wildlife trade is estimated to be worth 50 billion pesos a year, which includes the market value of wildlife and its resources, their ecological role and value, damage to habitats incurred during poaching, and loss in potential ecotourism revenues. Some of the most traded species we identified some as shown is the Philippine forest turtle, which is critically endangered, and hawksbill turtle. Also traded and threatened are the Philippine slow lories and the Philippine kakatu. And the wildlife crime hotspots, as shown, are the areas, the primary transshipment points and confiscation sites of wild animals from Indonesia. Although Republic Act 9147 or the Wildlife Resource Conservation and Protection Act of 2001 was a landmark law in protecting Philippine wildlife, the landscape has changed since its enactment. There's an evolution of wildlife crimes due to globalization, open borders, and better transport infrastructure, also permitted access of illegal wildlife trade syndicates to previously remote areas, while the internet gave unprecedented access to new markets. The 2 decades old Wildlife Act must be strengthened to address the growing scale and sophistication of wildlife crimes. There is a need to develop a more stringent legal framework, improve enforcement mechanisms, and strengthen interagency cooperation against illegal wildlife trading. Some of the gaps in policy and implementation identified are as follows. No measures to address the growing threats of IAS, uh, IAS. No mention of byproducts and derivatives in the illegal acts, such as trading of wildlife and transporting of wildlife. Penalties do not serve as a sufficient deterrent. Penalties do not correspond to the gravity of each offense, Enforcement powers are generally weak and lacking detail in the legislation. Ambiguities or vague language in the penal provisions. Resources for enforcement operations are scant compared with the number of possible violations. Proper operations of designated wildlife rescue centers is challenging due to limited space, personnel, and funding support. Implementation of the Wildlife Act can be heightened by revising and incorporating new provisions to enhance and clarify the law and by raising public awareness. Senate Bills number 2078 and 2079 will strengthen our response versus illegal wildlife trafficking. The crime of wildlife trafficking as a distinct and separate offense. Wildlife trafficking is committed when three or more individuals cooperate and work together in illegally collecting, killing, transporting, trading of wildlife, their byproducts and derivatives. It is for the purpose of exporting to or importing from another country. It involves 100 or more specimens of threatened species or 200 or more specimens of non-threatened species. Control and management of invasive alien species and introduction from the sea. The DNR, DA, PCSD, and the BMG are mandated to control and manage all invasive alien species, jointly establish a list of IAS, and formulate a national invasive alien species strategy action plan. In addition, wildlife, their byproducts, and derivatives may be exported to or imported from another country or introduced from the sea as may be authorized by these agencies. Under administrative adjudication powers, the DNR, DA, PCSD, and BMG are given the power to exercise administrative adjudication in all cases of violations and may cause the confiscation, forfeiture, and final disposition of all wild. These agencies may also impose fines and other penalties and cite in contempt those who mislead, evade, or refuse to cooperate in the investigation. Roles of other national agencies and local government units, in addition to the mandated roles and function as may be provided in this Act and other laws, rules, and regulations, national agencies, instrumentalities, including government-owned and controlled corporations, and LGUs shall assist and support the DNR, DA, PCSD, and BMG in the implementation and enforcement of this Act. LGUs shall require the presentation of duly issued permits and or clearances from DNR, DA, PCSD, or BMG as a prerequisite for the issuance or renewal of business permits and other applicable local government permits and clearances for all business and activities involving wildlife. Authority is vested in the DNR, DA, PCSD, and BMG to create permanent positions for wildlife law enforcement officers or to designate their existing permanent employees as enforcement officers. Enforcement officers are authorized to enforce wildlife and other environmental laws and are authorized to carry their agency's badge and government firearms in the conduct of their duties. These provisions protects enforcers and the agency against strategic lawsuit against public participation when enforcing the Wildlife Act. Legal actions filed to harass, vex, exert undue pressure, or stifle any legal recourse that any person, institution, or the government has taken or may take in the enforcement of the Wildlife Act shall be treated as a SLAP suit or SLAPP. In accordance with the Republic Act number 11054 or the organic law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, which
From DNR, we wish to recognize the presence of Senator Nancy Binay. Is she? I don't see her in the picture. I just want to know if she wants to make
mute mo na.
Good morning, Mr.
a short greetings, Senator Binay.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Magandang umaga po sa lahat ng ating bisita.
Mute mo na.
You can proceed na po.
Thank you, Senator Binay, for your presence. We will now recognize the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources headed by Director Gongona, Yusek Gongona.
Kailangan mo share mo yan.
Madam, good morning po, Madam Senator, and all the senators present, and everyone's advocate of conservation and preservation of wildlife, including
Nagloloko na naman tayo.
Fisheries and Aquatic Resources.
Yusek Gongona, your sound is, we cannot hear the sound of your voice. There's something wrong with the sounds.
Ma'am, meron lang po akong presentation.
Nagluloko yung sound ninyo, Yusek. Nagluloko yung sound.
Dahil kakatulong maigi, pinakita ko na ito sa iyo.
Sabi mo, nagluloko. Yusek Gongona, nagluloko yung sound mo.
Gusto ko lang.
Yusek. Nagluloko yung sound mo, Yusek. We cannot hear you. Ayusin nyo muna yung sound nyo. Hindi madinig.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Comsec Inda po. For the meantime na inaayos po yung sound system ni Director Gongona, may we proceed po to hear the comments and recommendations po ng National Fisheries Research and Development Institute headed by Dr. Lilian Garcia.
Okay. In the meantime that they're fixing the sound of Yusek Gongona, I want to recognize the National Fisheries Research and Development Institute headed by Dr. Lilian Garcia of the Department of Agriculture to say their stand on the matter.
Good morning, Madam Chair,
Yeah.
and to all the participants.
Please speak a little louder. You're not clear. You can remove your mask.
Good morning po sa lahat, Madam Chair, and to all the participants in this hearing.
Lakasan mo boses mo, Iha. Lakasan mo boses mo. Hindi madinig. Lahat ng sound nagluloko eh. Lakasan mo, Iha. Lakasan mo.
Narinig na po.
Mahina pa din eh. Mahina pa din eh. Louder. Louder.
Sabi nila po, ma'am, hindi para sa problema. Ganun lang. Sorry po. Ulit, ma'am. Good morning po,
Mhm.
the Chair, and to all the participants.
Lahat nagluloko.
Position paper of NFRDI. NFRDI recognizes and commends the two Senate bills that seek to strengthen the mechanism of conserving and protecting the wildlife resources in the country by revising Republic Act number 9147, otherwise known as the Wildlife Resources Conservation Act and Protection Act. Anem to that, NFRDI fully supports the bills, in particular the special roles that this institution will play in providing science-based assistance for its implementation by being one of the scientific authorities and at the same time as the chair of the same for aquatic species as stated in both bills. For your information, NFRDI, though a newly created agency under DA, has an existing general laboratory with basic facilities and manpower to conduct forensic work. More so, it also acts as co-chair of the Philippine Aquatic Redlist Committee or PALC by virtue of Fisheries Administrative Order number 360 series of 2017 issued by BFAR in compliance with Section 4 of Fisheries Administrative Order 233, which is the IRR of RA 9147 for aquatic wildlife. The NFRDI, even as a division of BFAR, prior to its creation as an institute under RA 8550, has been acting as a scientific authority of BFAR through its R&D projects and technical advice to BFAR for the protection and conservation of CITES listed species that include marine mammals, whales, dolphins, porpoises, all hard, stony, and precious corals like black corals, all giant clams or tacloba species, some species of sharks and rays, and 4 species of sea cucumber or balatan, and 6-chambered nautilus shell. Lastly, we are looking forward for a consolidated bill that would incorporate and harmonize Senate Bill numbers 2078 and 2079. Thank you po, Madam Chair, and good morning again.
Thank you to the Bureau of Fisheries, rather to the National Fisheries Research and Development Institute and Dr. Lilian Garcia. We now recognize the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development if they want to make a presentation. Headed by Attorney Chodora Jose Malta, Executive Director. Okay.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Mhm.
We in the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development recognize Senate Bills number 2078 and 2079 as the result of the continuous study and industry of our environmental scientists, lawyers, enforcers, lawmakers, and local communities, and that these bills are dedicated to strengthen the policy and legal framework for wildlife conservation and protection, and to boosting environmental protection measures and security. These bills are equipped with more comprehensive and much needed updates on Republic Act 9147's legal definitions, inclusions, exceptions, and gravity of penalties that are based on the substantive data from the collective experience, research, and discussions since its implementation in 2001. For an implementing agency like PCSD in a province where there exists a considerable number of organized wildlife act violators who illegally exploit our vast natural resources and biodiversity, the effective implementation of RA 9147 has become an important goal and priority. In our continuous efforts, our mandate of conserving our resources and habitats for sustainability, we have witnessed how the Wildlife Act violations are still rampant around Palawan. In fact, confiscations show that aside from pangolin, wildlife species in Palawan such as giant clams, hill mynas, and marine turtles have become the targets of environmental criminals. Our PCSD enforcement team's recent apprehensions, such as the seizure or confiscation of illegally traded mynas in 2019 and the giant clam species in 2020 in considerable volumes, show just how the province's natural resources are becoming illegally exploited, and how the violators appear to have not been deterred by the consequences of violating the current wildlife measures. In our case study that we came up with in the past years, we have seen how we have failed in getting a conviction against wildlife violators, particularly those engaged in wildlife trafficking, just because of the absence of clear definition of wildlife trafficking. We have likewise felt the adverse impact of lacking appropriate provisions under existing law, defining the liability of persons or officers behind juridical entities, which leads to difficulty in holding the masterminds and financiers liable. In addition, we have witnessed how violators are not deterred from continuing their illegal activities as a result of the minimal fees and fines. Violators are not deterred by the current penalties because the imposable penalties are just small fractions of the profit they are gaining from illegal activities. Further, the innovations and strategies and the transnational capacity of organized groups engaged in wildlife trafficking have spurred us to acknowledge the need to strengthen the authority and capability of our enforcement team members and our partner agencies. We also see the importance of providing the enforcement officers with clear enforcement mandates to ensure an effective and coordinated approach in detecting and tracking the wildlife activities. Even more so, we value the added measure in these bills to allow our staff, our enforcement staff, to carry firearms and to be professionalized in the enforcement of these laws. It is for these reasons that the PCSD supports the proposed bills in improving the legal framework to become responsive to the threat posed by illegal wildlife trade and trafficking. Some of the features that we are forward to in these two bills are, for one, making the act of wildlife trafficking itself an illegal act, a prohibited act separate from the acts penalized under existing law, which will address the identified gap of lacking appropriate provisions to penalize the act of trafficking itself. For two, providing a clear definition of wildlife trafficking, which will distinguish it from elements of possession, simple trade, and transport. Number three, providing for liability of persons or officers behind juridical entities to help address the gap of lacking provisions for masterminds and financiers. Number four, introduce the concept of wildlife money laundering and making it a crime. Number five, enhancing regulations of collection, possession, trade, transport, export, and import of regulated species, their byproducts, and derivatives. Number six, authorizing the creation of flotilla positions for wildlife enforcement officers and giving them clear authority, which will help address the continuing challenges of civilian enforcement agencies. Authorizing the DNR, DA, PCSD, and BMG to establish intelligence or confidential funds from Wildlife Management Fund to help address the challenges in pursuing confidential law enforcement operations. Amending the existing penal provisions of Republic Act 9147 to provide for higher penalties for wildlife crimes. Providing provisions for escalation of penalties without further legislation, separate offense for each species depending on the circumstances and the volume. Expressly providing for administrative adjudication that will strengthen the implementation mechanisms. Providing for establishment of forensic laboratories that will enhance the capabilities of our implementing agencies. And lastly, the express recognition of the jurisdiction of PCSD and BMG. For our suggestions and considerations not previously introduced into the bills, We have the following, Your Honor. For one, to add a provision expressly stating or declaring that wildlife trade trafficking is thereby made a predicate crime or as one of the unlawful activities under the anti-money laundering law, which shall take effect as a legislative amendment to the latter. In addition, number two, we have the present phrasing of the proposed provision on administrative adjudication is to be recommended that the following be included. The orders issued by the DNR, DA, PCSD, or BMG, or their respective authorized representatives citing certain persons in contempt or imposing payment of fines may be brought by the former to appropriate courts not for review, but to avail of the latter's enforcement remedies. Number three, it is also recommended to include as one of the expressly enumerated powers of wildlife enforcement officers the authority to conduct controlled delivery and other clandestine techniques subject to constitutional rights and issuance by the mandated agency as a strict and detailed guidance. Also, that any evidence gathered pursuant thereto may be used against the violators if not disqualified under existing rules of evidence. And lastly, it's recommended that the revised bills should provide for the creation of a national anti-wildlife trafficking task force or council with corresponding funding to be appropriated. It is for the above considerations that our agency earnestly supports the immediate enactment of these bills with a prayer to consider a few suggestions. This will not only strengthen the policy and legal framework for wildlife conservation and protection, but it will also enable the implementing agencies to develop appropriate strategies for regulation and enforcement mechanisms. We in PCSD are ready to be invested with these updated environmental protection measures to be implemented within our jurisdiction. This is all for the sake of confirming the changing needs of our natural resources and the implementing agencies and partners in order to ensure that the concept of sustainable development is still within our grasp. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you to the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development Executive Director Teodoro Jose Mata. If Yusek Gungona is ready now to make his position. Okay na. Okay na? Wala pa rin. Walang sound. No sound, Yusek. Walang sound.
Madam Chair, can I be heard already?
Yeah, right now, yes.
Sounds no. Madam, can I be heard already, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Hindi niya
Hello?
tayo nadidinig. We can hear you now. You go
Madam Chair,
on.
good morning po. Can I be heard already?
Yes.
Thank you po. Good morning po sa lahat, Madam Chair. The Department of Agriculture.
I think there is something wrong with your sound. Maybe we can ask you to just submit the paper of your position. Where are you ba? Are you in Mindanao?
Which is position on Senate Bill number 2078, those by Senator Cynthia A. Villar, and Senate number 279 by Senator Revive. Okay. Hello, Madam Chair. Can I be heard? Nandito
I
po.
think There's
transfer po ako
something.
ng computer. Hello?
Yes, yes. Dapat inaayos ng mga staff bago mag-hearing. Kakahiya. Eh, madilim.
Madam, nag-transfer po ako ng computer. Can I be heard already?
Yes, yes.
Madam Chair, good morning and good morning to everyone. Before I make a presentation, the Bureau suggests that the Senate bills be consolidated further. This Bureau supports the enactment of the proposals, particularly in the following: inclusion of the provisions on disputable presumption and qualifying circumstances. Number two, inclusion of the provisions on the creation of plantilla positions for wildlife law enforcement. And three, inclusion of the offenses and penalties of wildlife trafficking and wildlife laundering. With that, Madam Chair, may I share my presentation? This is a proposed a holistic approach that can really address concerns on the environment, the fisheries, and other matters, sir. Madam Chair. Sige, sige ko niya. This is entitled Enhancing the Mandates of Government Instrumentalities Aligned with Maritime, Environment, and Fisheries Towards a Food Secure Philippines. Our purpose here is more production of our capture fisheries and, of course, for value adding and generating income and jobs. Today's situation, Madam Chair, we are beset by crisis in the context of food security, the IUU fishing, poaching, and also other crimes that uses the sea as a medium, like drug trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking, smuggling, terrorism, kidnapping, piracy, and others. Next, we used to have 24 major fishing grounds. Now it's now 12 fishery management areas, and what we would like to emphasize on this is that we should concentrate our efforts, combined efforts of all government instrumentalities aligned with environment, maritime, and fisheries within the municipal waters only, because that is the most productive, the most important oceans that we have. Next. We need to address food security. We need to increase production. And of course, on the other hand, we will be addressing also crimes that uses the sea as a medium. Lahat po ng crimes na pumapasok, nangyayari po dito sa mainland ay dagdadaan po sa ating municipal waters. And therefore, ang pinakamaganda diyan na bantayan po natin ng ating municipal water in the context of food security. We will increase production, and of course, other matters, others will be solved. With that, harmonizing mandates of government instrumentalities aligned with environment, maritime, and fisheries. Lahat po ng itong mga ahensya na to ay kung pwede mabigyan ng mandate to protect in the protection of the municipal water. Coordinate law enforcement operation within municipal water, as well as within fisheries management areas. Improve marine environment will equate to more productive municipal waters and FMAs that will be resolved to safer Philippines and food secured Filipinos. Next. Ito po ang ating mga lead agencies na kailangan nandyan. Hindi kami humihingi ng additional fund for the meantime. Kailangan i-harmonize lang muna natin. Tanungin natin ang mga government instrumentalities aligned with environment, maritime, and fisheries kung anong kaya nilang bantayan sa municipal waters po. Municipal water lang. Next. And so with that, makikita mo, we concentrate on municipal waters for the meantime, and we will get all the productions that we need, increased productions over time kung magagawa po natin yun. Next. So what do we get from this? There will be lesser crimes, increased income, resiliency, improved well-being, better citizen. We increase production for food security, surplus, and job generation. We protect resources, wildlife included. Magiging sustainable ang ating mga kailangan, especially on food na nakukuha natin sa dagat po. And with that, we can always see the good things that will happen at the end of the tunnel. Then our action plan is we are proposing an executive order that the the harmonized mandates of government instrumentalities aligned with maritime fisheries and the environment, ay babigyan sila ng mandate, big mandate to protect the municipal water, especially on fisheries. So, makuha po natin dito, pag just doing that, meron tayong tangible income in our figures na 26 billion. And then if we can promise that the municipal water is sustainable and more productive because of that activity of harmonizing government instrumentalities aligned with maritime fisheries and environment, fishing is no longer a right; it becomes a privilege, and from that we can derive tributes, we can derive taxes and others. And with that also, because we were able to promise that to bring back sustainability and productivity of municipal water, because of that harmonization, corporate social responsibility can now be tripled and quadrupled kasi kumikita na po sila ngayon eh. So marami po tayong madiderive dyan, and in my assumption, we can the income and the resources that we can derive from that can even modernize a prioritized agency, say BIPAR or AFP. With that, Madam Chair, thank you very much and good morning.
I just want to mention that we are not proposing an executive order here. We are passing a law on wildlife protection. So hindi tayo mag-executive order. Magpapasa tayo ng batas. Anyway, ang susunod nating speaker is from the National Museum, Director Jeremy Barnes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning to you again, and good morning to Senator Zubiri and Senator Binay, as well as to all my fellow participants. Thank you for inviting us. The National Museum maintains an active and very old mandate in the area of natural history since 1901, our original founding, in fact. Now, while we may be better known in the area of cultural heritage, certainly not a primary implementer of such laws as the Wildlife Resources Protection and Preservation Act, the National Museum has long played a key role in maintaining the national reference collections so that we know the inventory of species that we have, both in our present time and back into ancient times through our paleontological collection. We make that collection available to all kinds of research in the scientific community. We help the lead agencies, DNR especially, in their mandates. And of course, as a museum, we disseminate through exhibitions and programs of all kinds appreciation of our biodiversity and natural resources. And we certainly try to do our part to advocate for sustainability and proper policies for environmental conservation. And from time to time, we do help in the law enforcement aspect regarding the illegal wildlife trade. We even serve as a repository for the courts for confiscated specimens that have been that are under investigation or under litigation. So I was able to provide the committee with a position paper, which I hope you have, Madam Chair and members.
We have.
Basically, I've kept it really tight because we aren't a primary agency, but recognizing the crucial and established role the National Museum plays, we just sought to highlight that we do have the mandate to undertake systematic research in natural history, so flora, fauna, as well as our geological resources, develop the national reference collections for the use of all, and for purposes of continuing this work, We do go out systematically, regularly in the field to collect and study our wildlife. And for this purpose, we do enjoy presently, under another law, the Cultural Heritage Act, RA 10066, an exemption from all permit systems. And this was threshed out in the IRR to RA 10066 to guide everyone concerned appropriately. It's in the position paper, so I won't read that. But then I go on to also highlight the role of the National Museum as the national depository for our type specimens. So we seek to have specimens of every species in Philippine territory, again, for the reference of everyone. And especially the most valuable specimens, which in the scientific community are referred to as holotypes. These are the original specimens that have been described by science and identified as a separate species. And so part of our recommendations was perhaps to reinforce this mandate of the National Museum in terms of being a collecting agency, a scientific repository, because this is contained in something that's more regarded as a cultural law than an environmental law. So that is there, and we welcome the provisions in both bills that highlight the National Museum as one of the scientific authorities. That is something we do to help in enforcing, implementing CITES and other laws as well. And we're very happy to continue doing that, and we're committed to that responsibility. We maintain the expertise and capacity to do our part. And we also welcome the exemption in both bills that exempts the National Museum from registering our natural specimens. Though we did not ask for that exemption, but even with it, we disseminate what we have. So the DNR and other agencies are, of course, welcome to be privy to everything the National Museum contains under their mandate. I'd like to point out that under our relatively new charter, RA 11333, passed around 2 years ago, the DNR became a ex officio member of our board of trustees. And so the purpose there being so that we could converge in this aspect of environment and natural resources, natural history. And that's been working very well so far. The last point we highlighted in our position paper, Madam Chair, Senators, was just a suggestion. We noticed that fossils are not explicitly regulated within our national framework, and perhaps fossils kind of fall between the cracks of between geology and biology, because they're really an area at the border, and so they're neither regulated well, we feel, by the mining laws and a resource extraction framework, nor by this wildlife protection framework. And so perhaps the committee, and deferring to the views of the primary agencies, might wish to consider including fossils, our paleontological resources, which could also be valuable for bioprospecting and that kind of applied research. Perhaps including that within the ambit of the provisions of the bill for protecting them, preserving them. And that is basically everything we have to say in a nutshell, ma'am. And we're happy to stay for the rest of the hearing, of course, and participate in the discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Jeremy Barnes of the National Museum. And yes, Senator Subiri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarificatory question with my dear friend Jeremy. on the issue of fossils because I'm also a fossil collector. So we're dealing with fossils
Because you are a fossil.
Ay, di pa naman, ma'am. Maputi lang buhok ko, but hindi pa ako fossil. But no, I actually have been collecting fossils for several years now, and but these are international fossils, fossils from Morocco, from different countries, no, the United States. So I guess the issue of Jeremy Barnes are fossils located in the Philippines, indigenous. I believe
Yes.
these are more indigenous fossils. So maybe we can make that exemption, Madam Chair. If it's fossils found in the Philippines, whether it's the because it's very common now is the trade of giant mollusks, yung taklobo ba yan?
Yes,
And
the fossilized or
fossilized
Taclobo.
clams,
Yeah.
fossilized clams. And there's actually a problem there now because the DNR has confiscated all these fossilized clams, which are actually hundreds of thousands of years old. So at least there is a clear-cut policy on that. If it's local fossils, then there should be no trade on that, or it should be registered, or there's some sort of supervision from the DNR. But I think fossils coming from, let's say, fossils of mammoths from Russia or from Alaska, I think these should be no problem. If I'm not mistaken, Jeremy, it's for indigenous fossils. Is that correct?
Yes, Sen Migs. We really, of course, mean fossils important to science. So not all fossils, because we have fossil fuels, we have coal and things like that that are fossils. So we're talking about scientifically important or culturally important fossils collected within our national territory.
Yes. Agree. I agree with that, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to clarify that because when we bring in my fossils whenever I go abroad, baka biglang hulihin ako ng DNR sa airport. So this is at least clear that it's actually fossils from locally found fossils, indigenous fossils. Thank you for the clarification, Jeremy.
Madam
Thank you,
Chair,
Madam Chair.
and makes, there is a gray area with prosecuting cases with these fossilized giant clams or taclobo because distinctions. Various lawyers have different positions because the law is clear on freshly harvested, those that were alive, no, and then were illegally harvested, trafficked, and now they're dead, right? So that which is the tragedy, which is the violation. Whereas the fossils are long dead, and so there's a bit of argument as to whether the DNR
Confusion, actually.
really has the
Confusion.
power over fossilized, not recently living, organisms such
Because
as
you know why,
such as
Jeremy,
taclobo.
Madam
So
Chair, there is a large.
it might be appropriate, yeah, to just clarify this because it is a finite resource. Some of these things are unique to the Philippines, and there is increasing traffic in them. Now, while Taclobo might be relatively common, you can find them in Bacnotan and San Juan in Batangas and many other places. There are other types of fossils, of course, that are less common, like those in Cagayan Valley, the ancient Philippine elephants, no? And we've been seeing, and it's been on the media, people collecting them for commercial purposes. While we can do something about it if it's done on public lands, we see this as the start of maybe a bigger, this problem might only grow because each specimen is unique. We still don't know that much about ancient life in the Philippines as much as we could in time. And these resources are becoming lost to science. So that's the origin of our concern here, Senator.
Yeah. Yes, Madam Chair. Actually, in other countries all around the world, there is no prohibition on the sale of fossilized clams. Because they've been dead for hundreds of thousands of years, taken away from under the ground. Unlike there is a prohibition, although, on the sale of live clams. Of course, more recent clams. So there has to be we have to have a sort of a distinction on that. But absolutely, it should be regulated and also supervised. And I agree with Jeremy. Not only do you have wild Philippine elephants, as well as, if I'm not mistaken, we also have, Madam Chair, the Philippine rhinoceros, which
Yes, indeed, sir.
yes, we have a rhinoceros species. Tens of thousands of years ago, we had rhinoceros in the Philippines. Can you imagine? Just like the Javanese rhinoceros. So that's something that we should also protect. And I agree with Jeremy Barnes. Those are the things that we don't want to trade and allow free trade on that particular very important resource. If I'm not mistaken, the National Museum is still trying to assemble a perfect specimen of the Philippine rhinoceros and the Philippine elephant. So we must protect whatever we can find in the field so that the National Museum can benefit from these important historical resources. So I support Jeremy Barnes on that, and the National Museum, Madam Chair. So as long as we just identify that it is indigenous fossils, because Triceratops, wala naman po tayong Triceratops. Pag nakapasok po tayo ng Triceratops skull, hindi dapat sana tayo mahuli ng DNR. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Senator Mix and uh, uh, Director Jeremy. Anyway, just like the live ones, we classify the dead ones also, which are important and which are not important, so that the important ones we can conserve. I think that is the spirit of what we want to do. Marami po tayong representative from Bangsamoro government. Kaya lang, sabi nila, transition government pa lang sila, so observer lang sila, hindi na sila magsasalita. So in their behalf, I think we will call on the Undersecretary of the Department of Interior and Local Government, Undersecretary Echeverry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. To our chairman, chairwoman, Senator Cynthia Villar, Senator Mig Zubiri, and Senator Nancy Binay, and to all my fellow resource speakers, good morning. At the outset, I think I have a presentation to show. At the outset, this level respectfully recommends that the subject Senate bills be consolidated as they pertain to the same objective, which is to ensure the protection and conservation of the country's wildlife. This level supports the objective of the herein proposed legislative measures, which recognizes the importance of wildlife conservation and its connection with human development and how it provides services beneficial to the people. Further, it also seeks to provide a solution on how wildlife conservation can be sustained by laying down comprehensive policies and framework in protecting remaining species, especially threatened or extinct species. Moreover, the subject bills are in harmony with and in furtherance of the state policy contained under the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, to wit, Section 16, the state shall promote and advance the right of the people to a balanced and healthful ecology in accord with the rhythm and harmony of nature. Be that as it may, this level would like to suggest and recommend to include provisions regarding parks and zoos and how it can support and ensure that proper conservation programs are being implemented in its establishment, such as appropriate habitats for the species. This is in line with the current ordinances passed by different local government units. Notwithstanding the foregoing, we would like to defer to the comments and recommendations of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and other government agencies with the mandate and technical expertise on the matter. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, DILGU Sec Echeverry. We will now hear from the Philippine National Police Deputy Director for Operations, General Franco Simborio. We recognize General Simborio.
Naririnig ba?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am. To the Honorable Chairperson, Senator Cynthia Villar, ma'am. To Senator Juan Miguel F. Subire and Senator Nancy Binay. To my fellow resource persons and other attendees, good morning to everyone. So on behalf of the Philippine National Police, it is with great honor and privilege to be invited to this deliberation regarding measures to conserve and protect wildlife resources through Senate House Bill numbers 2078 and 2079, or the proposed revised Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act of 2021. At the outset, the PNP would like to commend the laudable initiatives of the honorable sponsors. Truly, there is an urgent need to conserve and protect our scarce and depleting wildlife from overexploitation, habitat degradation, and pollution. In this regard, the PNP expresses our full support on the aforesaid bills aimed to ensure the continuing existence of Philippine wildlife and wildlife in general through these bills. The PNP further supports the provision as to designation of wildlife enforcement officers who will be trained to implement the said law in the seizure of illegally traded wildlife and to arrest the violators. Also, the stiffer penalties for these violators we support. So once again, the PNP extend the utmost gratitude for the opportunity to communicate our position on this significant pieces of legislation. Rest assured of our untiring support and cooperation on matters of mutual concern. So ma'am, we will submit our formal position. This is a consolidated reports from our Maritime group and ABSI group, considering that they are part of our law enforcement. So we will consolidate our report and submit our formal position paper once it is signed by our Chief PNP. So that's all, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, General Simborio. And we will now hear from the Philippine Coast Guard Marine Science Investigation Force, headed by Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander Grace Campos.
Madam Chair, Comsec in the po. I think there's a problem po sa internet connection ng Philippine Coast Guard. May we proceed po with the National Bureau of Investigation?
Okay.
Represented by Senior Agent Abner Texon.
Okay. We recognize the MBI.
Good morning, Madam Chair. To Madam Chair, Senator Cynthia Villar, to Senator Juan Miguel Subiri, and to Senator and to my fellow law enforcers and colleagues BMB Biodiversity Management Bureau, especially to Dr. Toledo and Doc Bulik. Good. Allow me to read the position paper in support to Senate Bill number 2078 and 2079, prepared by Supervising Agent Isaac Arc Arpeso Jr., Chief Environmental Crime Division of the National Bureau of Investigation. The National Bureau of Investigation supports the passage of Senate Bills number 2078 and 2079, authored by Senator Cynthia Villar, Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, and Climate Change Chairperson, and Senate Senator Juan Miguel Zubiri, Senator Majority Floor Leader, respectively, that seek to strengthen Republic Act number 9147 or the Wildlife Resource Conservation and Protection Act of 2001 by addressing the growing and sophisticated syndicate of illegal wildlife trade in the Philippines. Although Republic Act number 9147 was a landmark piece of legislation in protecting Philippine wildlife and biodiversity, the landscape has changed since its enactment. There is an evolution of wildlife crimes due to globalization. Open borders and better transport infrastructure also permitted access of illegal wildlife trade syndicates to previously remote areas, while the internet gave unprecedented access to new markets. Illegal wildlife trade in the Philippines is estimated to be valued at 50 billion pesos yearly. Globally, illegal wildlife trade is the fourth largest illegal trade worldwide, behind only illegal drugs, arms, and human trafficking. In fact, the country's wildlife law enforcement community noted increasing incidents of apprehensions of syndicated taking of wildlife in large quantities with international connection. The NBI affirms that Senate Bills number 2078 and 2079, once enacted into law, will modernize the country's response and equip our government agencies with a legal framework to effectively
Philippine Ports
address
Authority.
highly organized criminal activity linked to illegal wildlife trade. The Bureau also maintains the need to address the growing scale and sophistication of wildlife crimes and develop a more stringent legal framework to improve enforcement mechanisms. In particular, the NBI supports the set of amendments that establishes the crime of wildlife trafficking as a distinct and separate offense, mandates government agencies to control and manage invasive alien species, provides the power of administrative adjudication to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, Palawan Council for Sustainable Development, and the Bangsamoro government, expands the role of other national government agencies and local government units, and increases fines and penalties to deter violations, criminal activities, among others. The National Bureau of Investigation respectfully supports the passage of Senate Bills number 2078 and 2079 into law for the government to effectively address illegal wildlife trade and protect and conserve the country's wildlife resources and their habitats. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Texon of MBI. We will now hear from the Philippine Ports Authority, represented by Attorney Ferdinand Texon.
Good morning,
Philippine
Madam
Port.
Chair.
Yes.
Good morning, Senators Subiri and Binay, and good morning to everyone present. If I may, EPA recognizes the importance of strengthening and improving the Wildlife Act, particularly on providing funding mechanisms and imposition of heftier penalties to enhance the deterrent effect of illegal, unreported, and unregulated collection, possession, exportation, and importation of wildlife, byproducts, and its derivatives. We would like to take this opportunity to inform this honorable committee that Philippine Ports Authority has been implementing measures to protect Philippine wildlife, one of which is entering into a Memorandum of Understanding with DNR BMB, the purpose of which is to deter and combat illegal wildlife trade in all ports within the jurisdiction and supervision of EPA. Also, EPA assess all its ports with respect to its readiness to respond to wildlife trafficking. In this regard, EPA respectfully endorses the proposed legislative measures and assure you of PPA's full cooperation and support in combating illegal trade in ports. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you to the Philippine Ports Authority, Philippine Ports Authority, headed by Attorney Ferdinand Texon. Our next speaker would be the Office of Transportation Security, represented by Attorney Sharina Flor Cacho Fermin and Attorney Karen Lim.
Good morning, Honorable Senator Cynthia Villar, Senator Miguel Zubiri, Senator Nancy Binay, Undersecretaries, representatives of our esteemed government agencies, and resource speakers to this legislation. Allow me to read to you our position paper on the matter. The Office
Sino
for
daw susunod?
The Office for Transportation Security is one with the state in creating and promoting policies on protection, conservation, and preservation of wildlife resources. The Philippines is a country abundant with wildlife resources with a unique set of flora and fauna, even endemic to our country. Thus, not surprising that there are those who abuse this abundance and profit therefrom by engaging in illegal trade of wildlife. Senate Bill numbers 2078 and 2079 are aptly and timely proposed. It addresses wildlife trafficking and criminalizes wildlife laundering. The definition of punishable acts and the identification of punishment shall now be greater and commensurate. Other relevant provisions are on criminalizing the introduction of alien wildlife that are intrusive or endangers organic species, and the protection against the smuggling of endangered species. While this office fully supports the Senate Bill numbers 2078 and 2079, it has no mandate concerning protection, conservation, and preservation of Philippine wildlife. This office mandate is securing transportation of people and goods and securing the public against acts of terrorism in transportation and unlawful interference. Nevertheless, the Office for Transportation Security commits its full support and cooperation with the government agencies involved in wildlife protection and shall render assistance whenever the circumstance requires. That's all, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you to the Office of Transportation Security. We now hear from the Philippine Center on Transnational Crime, represented by Police Colonel Cornelio Salinas.
Madam Chair, good morning, and to all other senators present, distinguished participants, good morning. As far as the Philippine Center on Transnational Crimes, we submit to the contents of Senate Bill 2078 to be fused into Senate Bill 2079. And I would like to inform the body that the Philippine Center on Transnational Crimes, which wherein the Interpol, International Police, National Central Bureau, Manila, is under its wings. We have a different Interpol-related environmental activities, and these are sponsored by Interpol. Namely, we facilitate the Interpol-led operations related to environmental crimes like Operations 30 Days at Sea. It is ongoing from 2018 to 2021. Operations Ikatiri 2021. Project Mask, that is from 2018 to the present. So, and we also disseminate other Interpol related policies on environmental crimes, and the Philippine Center on Transnational Crimes has its own environmental crimes desk in fusion to other 11 transnational crimes within its mandate. So we submit to this Senate Bill 2078 and 2079, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Philippine Center on Transnational Crime. We now hear from the Special Envoy on Transnational Crime, Ambassador Bruce Concepcion.
Your Honor, the Chairman of the Senate Committee on the Environment, Senator Ma'am Cynthia Villar, esteemed members of the Senate, Senator Juan Miguel Mig Subiri, sir, along with Senator Nancy Binay, ma'am. Excellencies, distinguished representatives, guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This office hereby expresses its pleasure that the legislative efforts to amend the Wildlife Conservation and Protection Act is now being discussed in the honored halls of the Senate. The Office of the Special Envoy on Transnational Crime further expresses its support to the efforts to amend and update Republic Act Number 9147, otherwise known as the Wildlife Conservation and Protection Act of 2001, with the vision of being more proactive in the conservation and protection measures, as well as in being attuned to the challenges and difficulties in preventing and combating illicit trafficking of wildlife. To the full extent of the mandate, our mandate, as regards to the government's campaign against transnational crime, the OZC hereby articulates its position on the proposed Senate Bill number 2078 and 2079. On the proposed Senate Bill 2078, in the Declaration of Policy in Section 2, all the proposed amendments are fully supported by this office, especially Provision E, which highlights the problem of illicit wildlife trafficking as a large-scale, transnational, and organized criminal activity. By doing so, it sets the tone for the much-needed revisions to 9147. The introduction of new terms in Section 5 are noteworthy, especially large-scale and wildlife trafficking. These attempts to describe the modus operandi of criminals or criminal organizations engaged in illegal exploitation and or trading of wildlife. These also function as a possible deterrent for committing illicit wildlife trafficking from the higher penalties to be imposed on wildlife trafficking, more so when it is large scale or committed by a syndicate. The introduction of the disputable presumption in Section 28.4b is also beneficial to the frontliners, the law enforcement personnel who will do the case build-up, as the quality of a case investigation will be better if parties are cooperative. Additionally, our law enforcement personnel will now be better trained and equipped to conduct financial investigation on the proceeds of crime, including how criminals and criminal organizations are using money laundering schemes to facilitate their crime. Furthermore, under the proposed Section 28.7 and 28.8, enforcement officers and deputized enforcement officers are allowed to seek the cooperation of international and regional organizations in the conduct of its investigation and related enforcement actions. The Philippines, with a strategic location and diverse ecosystem favoring for a rich flora and fauna, plays a significant yet complex role in the illegal wildlife trade. It is a source of endemic and endangered species alike, while also becoming a destination for trafficked animals and their parts. Hence, multi-agency and cross-border coordination is key to preventing and combating the illicit wildlife trade. Also, the creation of a wildlife traffic monitoring unit and the wildlife regulatory law enforcement management information system will be a welcome enhancement for the effective implementation of our laws. With a well-established reporting system, it will also be easier to gather data and information for the Philippine reports to the UN and other agencies if this will be realized, which is also a concern of our office. On the proposed Senate Bill 2079, the proposed revision to RA 9147 is substantially similar to 2078, and it would be beneficial if both draft bills be combined so that a stronger bill will be created. On Senator Cynthia Villar's privileged speech, ma'am, on the conservation and protection of wildlife during the 8th March 2021 plenary session, the privileged speech on the conservation and protection of wildlife delivered by the Honorable Senator in the Senate plenary session last March 8 not only touched on the importance of strengthening the mechanisms of conserving and protecting wildlife resources in the country, but it also highlighted other important challenges that should equally be addressed, as enumerated by Senator Pia Cayetano in her intervention in that same session, our concern for wildlife degradation indeed affects several sustainable development goals of the UN, which are as follows: SDG 2, 3, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, SDG 11, among others, and many others. The Wildlife Conservation and Protection Act of 2001 is 2 decades old already, and thus the proposal to amend and revise it is timely to ensure that the law is attuned to the needs and challenges of the present times. Finally, this office hopes to reiterate that what it has raised in the forums related to wildlife in the past, namely, number one, the treatment of wildlife or even environmental crime subject to certain caveats as a transnational crime. This goes with the recommendation, the mention of this office, OCC, as the diplomatic national point of contact for this newly recognized transnational crime in regional and national forums. 2, coming up with a single comprehensive official master list of wildlife, classifying them as critically endangered, indigenous, invasive, economically important, etc. And regularly, say every 5 years, updating it to a very ready and official legal reference in the enforcement up to the prosecution of wildlife-related laws. This will not only make enforcement convenient, but also transparent. 3, reinforcing the role and responsibility of the National Law Enforcement and Coordinating Committee, Subcommittee on Enforcement on Environment, as a pivotal law enforcement network and functional mechanism in the management of the environment and in the enforcement of wildlife and environmental laws. No need to create another body while harmonizing the related laws and the agencies concerned. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Madam Senator. May we have an outstanding success in this endeavor and intergenerational one, intergenerational effort and undertaking. Thank you so much, Madam.
Thank you, Ambassador Bruce Concepcion, for speaking in behalf of your advocacy. And now we go on to the next speaker, the representative of the League of Provinces of the Philippines, Governor Velasco, represented by Ms. Angelica Sanchez, Director Policy Development.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning po, Senator Cynthia Villar, Senator Juan Miguel Zubiri, Senator Nancy Binay, and my fellow resource persons and guests. So, at the outset, the League of Provinces of the Philippines support the spirit and intent of Senate Bills 2078 and 2079 towards strengthening the current policy framework on wildlife conservation and protection. We also welcome the initiative of both bills in recognizing and strengthening the role of LGUs in wildlife conservation and management. However, Madam Chair, we would also like to emphasize that there is a need for an iterative and up-to-date sharing of information. So, because due to we have to admit that LGUs really do not have the technical expertise in terms of wildlife management and conservation, we really leave it up to the DANR and the DA and other agencies to provide us up-to-date scientific information. And at the same time, Madam Chair, we would also like to emphasize the need for regular consultations with LGUs on the wildlife management committees to update and guide the latter on the latest technical and scientific advisories, Madam Chair. So that is all for the League of Provinces, and we will be submitting our official position paper as soon as it is signed by Governor Velasco. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Maraming salamat sa League of Provinces. We now call on the representative from the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, Dr. Teresa Mondita Lim, Executive Director.
Good morning, Honorable Chair, Senator Cynthia Villar, Senator Mig Zubiri, Senator Nancy Binay. Please allow us to express our support to these bills and towards a consolidated bill to update the Philippines Wildlife Act. We appreciate this timely effort to revise and enhance this 20-year-old wildlife legislation, considering the opportunity afforded us by the COVID-19 pandemic to re-examine the way we deal with wildlife, our biodiversity, including the immensely rich and multiple benefits we can derive from the sustainable use of these biological resources and the genetic materials they can provide. As mentioned by Senator Mig Subiri, illegal collection of genetic resources is depriving Filipinos of monetary benefits from the development of these genetic resources. In relation to this, under the ongoing global negotiations on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, discussions on ways and means to integrate the international concerns on digital sequence information that may help ensure that countries like the Philippines will get fair and equitable share of the benefits from the utilization of data and information derived from wildlife resources, including genetic information used for commercial purposes. These developments at the global level may further enrich the amendments to the Wildlife Act, especially those that are aligned with the country's priorities and can effectively implemented on the ground. Additionally, we welcome the provisions on wildlife trafficking and wildlife laundering in the bills. To complement this, various elements of transnational crime may be incorporated, aligning ourselves with the comments of PCTC and Ambassador Bruce Concepcion on this matter, to highlight the importance of multilateral cooperation among neighboring countries in addressing wildlife threats across boundaries. As the only ASEAN center hosted in the Philippines, the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity can play a valuable role in supporting and scaling up such collaborative actions. Indeed, we cannot agree more on the importance of protecting our wildlife resources to help reduce the risks of future pandemics, as duly emphasized by Your Honor, Senator Villar in her privileged speech. For that, we express our readiness to assist the committee in taking into account through our revised Wildlife Act the One Health approach, which considers the strong linkages among wildlife, domestic animals, livestock, and human health. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Madam Chair.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Teresa Mondita Lim, for sharing your knowledge. We will call now on the Haribon Foundation, represented by Mr. Sam Pedragosa, Policy and Advocacy Officer.
Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Salamat po, kagalang-galang na Senadora Villar. Pagbati din po kay Senador Mig Subiri at kay Senadora Binay. Malinaw po ba?
Yes, very loud and clear.
Kami po sa Haribon ay lubos na nagpapasalamat sa imbitasyon at ipinapahayag po namin ang aming lubos na suporta sa mga panukalang batas upang lalong palakasin ang pangangalaga sa ating mga buhay ilang. Ang Haribon po ay isang pundasyon na naglalayong gawing biodiversity champion ang bawat Pilipino. Okay. Meron lang po akong ilang statistics dito na gustong... Hello?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Kung titinan po natin, meron tayong 30 million hectares sinasabi na lupa. 15 million po yan ay sinasabi na kagubatan. Yung natitirang 14 million mahigit ay alienable and disposable. Meron po tayong unclassified na 755,000 hectares na forest land. Nakakalungkot na nag-start ang ating land classification in 1911 and then it's 2021, di pa rin tapos yung ating land classification. Pero ang gusto ko lang pong lagyan ng punto dito, kung meron tayong 15 million hectares na kagubatan, ito po yung tahanan ng ating mga buhay ilang. Bagamat maganda yung pagtutok natin upang mapigilan ang pag-aabuso sa ating mga buhay ilang, tulad na nabanggit kanina ni Yusek ng BMB. Pumapangalawa lang po yung illegal wildlife trade sa dahilan ng pagkawalan ng ating mga buhay ilang sa habitat loss. Gusto ko po idiin, nung napasa po yung NIPAS Act of 1992 as amended by the E-NIPAS Act of 2018, lumalabas na meron tayong mga 5 milyong hektarya mahigit na protected areas para lang maging mapangalagaan natin yung ating biodiversity kasama ng mga buhay ilang. Kung ibabawas po natin yung 5.4 million hectares na nasa ilalim ng protected area system natin.
4.5, Mr. Sam, 4.5 million hectares ang
Yes, ma'am.
legislated protected
Yes,
area.
ma'am. Yung
4.5.
5.4 kasi ma'am, kasali na yung hindi pa legislated.
Legislated.
Kaya yun po ang punto ko. Kung ibabawas po natin sa 15 million na forest land natin, may mahigit kumulang may 10 milyong hektarya tayo na nasa labas ng protected area system natin. Ito po yung mga supposedly kagubatan na kailangan din ng iba yung pangangalaga sapagkat sila din po ay tahanan ng ating mga buhay ilang. Kaya sinusuportahan po namin yung provision ng inyong panukalang batas sa pagtatatag ng mga critical habitats upang mapunuan yung management regime nitong natitirang 10 milyong hektarya ng kagubatan. Pero kung titignan po natin yung forest cover naman, sinasabi may 5.7 million hectares tayo na gubat yung may forest cover. Pero ang ating forest land, 15 million. Suma total, meron din tayo 10 million na wala ng gubat pero ang classification, forest land pa rin. Ito po yung dapat siguro matutukan natin sapagkat tulad na nabanggit ninyo sa inyong privilege speech, nung sinelebrate yung World Wildlife Day, ang paksa po ay Forest and Livelihood, Sustainable People and Sustaining People and Planet. Maganda po itong batas na ito at lubos po kami sumusuporta. Ito pong Wildlife Resources Act ay isang magandang companion law sa ating NIPAS Act as amended by the NIPAS Act. Pero lubos po namin pagpapasalamat kung mabibigyan din ng committee ng equal treatment at panahon yung pagbibigay ng bagong batas na mag-govern at mamamahala sa ating mga natitirang kagubatan. Tinutukoy ko po ito yung Sustainable Forest Management Act na ipinasa na ng Kamara de Representante at kasalukuyang nandirito po sa committee na pinangungunahan ni kagalang-galang Senadora Villar. Sana po bilang pagtugon, lahat po ng batas na ito ay sinusuportahan natin at kailangan natin upang sa gayon ay mapanatili natin ang ating mga buhay ilang, hindi lang yung buhay ilang, pati na yung mga pamayanan or ecosystems na kanilang nagiging tahanan. Maraming salamat po.
I just want to inform the Haribon Foundation that in our committee, there are 7 more protected areas that we will pass. Yes. This coming session, para mas madami yung 107 po ngayon ang legislated protected areas, then they become 114 plus 7. At nag-usap po kami ni Secretary Simatu na yung greening program budget po ay i-assign na lang sa mga protected areas, sa legislated protected areas. So there will be some sort of responsibility kasi yung mga legislated protected area po, merong PAMBI yan eh. May management committee composed of local government, DNR, at saka mga foundation, yung mga NGO. So they will be the one to manage the protected area. And if the budget for greening will be given to them, then we can see that that will really help a lot in making them more green in the future. So yun po ang napag-usapan namin ni Secretary Simatu. So that would be the change in the budget for next year. For this year pala na for 2022. So we are continually passing legislation to convert yung mga important forest land into legislated protected area. And it will depend on their kanilang mga representative in Congress kasi it comes as a local bill. Ang magfa-file yung congressman, ipapasa niya sa Kongreso, tapos kukunin namin lahat at ipapasa namin sa Senado. So it's a local legislation, yung pagpasa ng legislated protected area. So the next speaker would be from Tanggol, Kalikasan, represented by Attorney Palmieri, their lawyer. Okay, Tanggol, Kalikasan.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Honorable Cynthia Villar, to Honorable Mig Subiri, to Honorable Nancy Binay, and to my fellow colleagues and partners from the government agencies and non-government organizations, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. On behalf of our Executive Director, Attorney Maria Rone D. Vizcaya-Rachin, allow me to read to this august body our organization's statement of support for Senate Bills number 2078 and 2079 to strengthen Republic Act number 9147 or the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act of 2001. To address the growing and sophisticated syndicate of illegal wildlife trade or IWT in the Philippines, we must strengthen our response in protecting the country's biodiversity and wildlife. Although RA 9147 or the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act was a landmark law in protecting Philippine wildlife, the landscape has changed since its enactment. There is an evolution of wildlife crimes due to globalization. Open borders and better transport infrastructure also permitted access of IWT syndicates to previously remote areas, while the internet gave unprecedented access to new markets. The 2-decade-old Wildlife Act must be strengthened to address the growing scale and sophistication of wildlife crimes. There is a need to develop a more stringent legal framework, improve enforcement mechanisms, and strengthen interagency cooperation against illegal wildlife trade. It is in this light that Tanggol Kalikasan, a non-stock, non-profit, public interest environmental law office, strongly supports the passage into law of Senate Bills number 2078 and 2079, authored by Committee on Environment Chairperson Senator Cynthia Villar and Senate Majority Floor Leader Senator Juan Miguel Subiri, respectively. Currently, illegal wildlife trade in the Philippines is estimated to be valued at 50 billion yearly. This estimate includes the market value of wildlife and its resources, their ecological role, damage to habitats incurred to poaching, and loss in potential ecotourism revenues. Globally, illegal wildlife trade is the fourth largest illegal trade worldwide behind illegal drugs, arms, and human trafficking. The country's wildlife law enforcement community has also noted increasing incidents of apprehensions of syndicated taking of wildlife in large quantities and international connection. The proposed measures will modernize the country's response and equip our government agencies to effectively address highly organized criminal activity linked to illegal wildlife trade. In particular, the set of amendments establishes the crime of wildlife trafficking as a distinct and separate offense, mandates government agencies to control and manage invasive alien species, provides the power of administrative adjudication to the DNR, Department of Agriculture, PCSD, and the Bangsamoro government, expands the role of other national government agencies and local government units, and increases fines and penalties to deter violations and criminal activities, among others. Sophisticated crimes need a sophisticated and robust response. Strengthening RA 9147 through Senate Bills number 2078 and 2079 is a necessary step to protect and conserve the country's wildlife resources and their habitats. That's all, Madam Chair, and once again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you to Tanggol Kalikasan. We will now wish to acknowledge the Philippine Native Plants Conservation Society, Inc., represented by Mr. George Yao. Mr. George Yao? Wala.
Good morning.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Senator Cynthia Villar, Senator Juan Miguel Subiri, and Senator Nancy Binay, and all the other participants. We have been waiting a long time for the revision of the Wildlife Act, and we are happy to hear that this is going on, and we appreciate being invited to this hearing. Due to the short notice and miscommunication among our officers, we were not able to come up with a proper position paper. However,
you can submit it that you can submit that later in writing.
Okay.
Thank you. Uh, uh, I just want to point out that we see some of the provisions, although applicable to animals, are not very appropriate for plants. And also, we see some provisions that limit our ability to pursue our advocacy. So hopefully we will formalize and submit a formal position paper on this.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We will most welcome your suggestions because you're more experienced in your line of work. So we would like to hear your suggestions. Thank you very much. We now wish to acknowledge the Philippine Orchid Society represented by Mr. Jose Marie Lacandula. Philippine Orchid Society. Andiyan pa ba?
Good morning, Madam
Yes, yes.
Senator Cynthia. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Okay.
Good morning. As well as Senator Zubiri, Ma'am Nancy Binay, and the rest of the participants. We welcome the effort in conserving Philippine wildlife and flora. We at the Philippine Orchid Society support this endeavor. However, we would like to know what possible steps that we can contribute to these efforts, knowing that we are the most impacted. We are a very impacted group because of the nature of our advocacy, which is orchid conservation and orchid growing throughout the nation. Now, we hope that steps regarding the rules and implementation of this measure would not demonize our members as well as industry participants. However, we are doing our part in educating our members about the importance of conservation of orchids, especially when the waling-waling, an endemic Philippine orchid, is widely used all over the world for breeding. So we will be putting up suggestions and forward it to your office, Ma'am Cynthia.
Okay.
In due time.
Yeah.
And we hope we have been working with various government agencies, especially for permits, and we also work with Ma'am Mundita Lim, especially so that our efforts are transparent, and we hope for more success on your part, Ma'am Cynthia.
Thank you. We will wait for your position paper and your suggestions so that we can adjust the bill. We know that Orchid is a business here in the Philippines and it is a very good business, and we do not intend to affect your business. It's just that maybe the rare types we will try to maintain so that it will not grow extinct. Okay, so maybe you can make suggestions on that. So thank you very much to the Philippine Orchid Society. We now call on the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines, represented by Attorney Jennifer Ramos.
Magandang tanghali sa lahat. Okay naman siguro yung audio ko, ano? So I'm also here as...
Malakas nga eh.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay,
So I'm also here representing the Philippine Eagle as volunteer lawyer of the Philippine Eagle Foundation. So we are presenting these comments and recommendations based on our experience in prosecuting a hunter in Bukidnon who shot, chopped up, cooked, and even ate a Philippine eagle and also our collective experience in the field as birders. Most important, we also want to remember what happened to Lolong, the world's largest crocodile ever caught, and to ensure that it won't happen again. So our comments and recommendation on SBN 2079. First, we wish to commend the amendment by Senator Subiri on the fine and imprisonment. Kasi dati and or ito eh. Now it's just end. This is important to us sa Philippine Eagle Foundation because of the case in People versus Brian Balaon. Ito nga yung Philippine Eagle. We felt that the fine, so ang sentence sa kanya was only 100,000. The minimum fine was not commensurate to the offense. Sabi nga ni Senator Villar kanina, it was just a slap on the wrist. Considering that the victim was our national bird, and also the expenses incurred in rehabilitating the eagle before it was released to the wild, the search and rescue, grabe ang search and rescue nitong looking for this eagle, and the litigation expense, of course. So we are happy with the amendment that now it's fine and imprisonment. Hindi na, kasi para siyang naging loophole noon na naging 100,000 yung na-fine dun sa hunter. And since he couldn't afford to pay the fine, ang interpretation noon ay bumalik doon sa revised penal code. So he ended up with a 6-month imprisonment. So loophole yun because for critical endangered species, the imprisonment is the minimum is 6 months and 6 years and 1 day. So on Section 5 of Senator Subiri's bill, we would like to recommend to include a definition of maltreatment. Because I feel that what happened to Lolong was maltreatment. He was placed in a pond too small for him, the constant drainage of the pond water so that the paying visitors can see him, and this water these were super stressful for Lolong that eventually led to organ failure and to his death. We also observed nature photography in the field. So we see photographers flashing out birds by firing air guns or scaring them or leaving food on the open fields to draw out the birds or the animals so that they could take great shots or better photos. In underwater photography, we see divers poking at sea creatures and manipulating them so that they can great photos as well. Sometimes they even move. Nililipat nila tong mga sea creatures and transfers them to another habitat kung saan prone to attack yung mga sea creatures. So we also see the practice of feeding whale sharks in Oslob. Nakikita natin yon, di ba? Which is actually harmful to the whale sharks. But as we can see, no one's taking legal action on those tour operators. So we request that maltreatment be defined because it's part of the prohibited acts. And these acts I mentioned should be included in the definition. On Section 30, the penalties for the illegal acts, I noted B, inflicting injuries, trading of wildlife, E, F, collecting, hunting, and possession, H, maltreatment and inflicting other injuries, J, wildlife laundering. The penalty should include a clause that government expenses for rehabilitation kasi syempre pagkatapos or siguro na seize ng mga legal enforcement agencies natin, anong gagawin dun sa mga wildlife kung buhay pa? Syempre i-rehab yun ng DNB at syempre i-release yun back to the wild or to its natural habitat. So these expenses should be advanced by the government, syempre, but they should be paid by the perpetrator upon conviction. For penalties for destruction of nests, that's letter G, trees and plants, K, destruction of wildlife habitat. There should also be clause that government expenses for rehabilitation of these plants, rehabilitation of the habitat, or restoration must be paid by the perpetrator upon conviction as well. So we suggest that the DNR must issue rules or the appropriate agency, kasi pwede rin ang PCSD, I understand, on the following: 1 year from effectivity of the amendments. Rules and guidelines on rehabilitation of rescued wildlife from injuries and illegal trade, and their release back to their natural habitat. Second, rehabilitation or restoration of the host trees or plants and habitats. So dapat nandun din yung guidelines. On Section 39 on wildlife law enforcement, we recommend that the duties should also include documentation, evidence gathering, identifying witnesses for affidavits, filing the administrative and criminal complaints, and coordination with the prosecutor even up to conviction. This is very important. Someone said from the enforcement agencies that case build-up is very important. A winning case starts at evidence gathering and proper search and seizure. Kasi kung wala yun, pwedeng matalo tayo sa trial mismo. So after Section 43, that's the role of DNR lawyers, we would like to recommend to add role of Section 43 is role of local government units. And we would like to add that after Section 43, we add the role of DNR lawyers to assist the law enforcers, which will be deputized in documentation, evidence gathering, crafting affidavits, kasi syempre kailangan din talaga nila ng assistance. And even, especially in the filing of cases. And continued coordination with the prosecutor up to conviction. This is critical because in our experience, most prosecutors, public prosecutors, are not really that trained in prosecuting environmental laws. And minsan nga, para sa kanila, yung cases lang. Parang, case lang yan, environmental case lang yan. There was even one prosecutor in Tawi-Tawi na ayaw niya mag-prosecute ng mga illegal fishing cases kasi sabi niya, ang mga witnesses like the maritime enforcers, malipat ng assignment, wala na akong witness. So dapat tingnan din yan na dapat suportahan to mga law enforcement officers once they testify as witnesses for the prosecution of these cases. Now on SBN 2078, recommend the new provision and on invasive alien species kasi wala ito sa current Wildlife Act natin. It has been really distressing for us to read about government agencies releasing invasives, mga tilapia, carp into natural ecosystems. For example, yung 4 million tilapia fingerlings in Lake Lanao released by BIFAR Region 10. Yung release of 87,000 carps sa Lake Mainit na protected areas by BIFAR BIFAR Caraga. Dispersal sa mga river, 76 tilapia, EMB pa, parang ganun. Tapos meron din sa Lubok River, BIFAR ito. And we called the attention of BIFAR, DA, BMB about this way back in May 2020, pero wala pa rin. And in fact, may nakikita kaming mga press release na may nag-release nga sa mga natural ecosystems, na mga invasives. So thank you, ma'am, for this new provision. So this is on Section 7. On crafting a list of IAS in invasive alien species. The review and update of the list must have a definite period, perhaps 2 years. Kasi kung iiwan mo lang siyang walang period, baka naman aabutin tayo ng siyam-siyam kagaya ng NAIAP list ng non-environmental NAIAP sa Solid Waste Management Act. So Section 7 also authorizes the DNR, the DA, the PCSD, and BMG. Ano tong BMG? Siguro BMB to. I think ilang beses siyang na-mention sa draft bill. Baka naman BMB ito. And anyway, they're authorized to exterminate
Bangsamoro government.
Oh! Thank you for that. All right. To exterminate invasive alien species. So inisip ko, if they're authorized to exterminate, why not? We always say prevention is better than the cure. So why not we prohibit the introduction of invasives in natural ecosystems, such as river, lakes, and sea, and include it as an illegal act in Section 25 of the bill. On Section 23, suportahan ko ang mungkahi ng Haribon, yung critical habitats. We also note the explanatory note that we
since your manifestation is very specific, can you put it in writing? Kasi we cannot remember all of them. So we can consider them. Put it
Alright,
in
ma'am.
writing and submit it to us kasi ang mga sinasabi mo very specific na by article. So we won't remember it. We might miss it. So submit it in writing so we can consider it in the TWG. Okay.
Alright. Kailan po ang deadline, ma'am?
ASAP.
Alright, ma'am. Kasi bago lang ako nasabihan nito. So,
Yeah.
Oo.
So you just put it in writing all you're saying today so that we the one who will make who will do the TWG will consider everything that you have mentioned, or else we will forget it and it will not be considered.
Alright, ma'am. I appreciate that so much. So on critical habitats, we are also concerned that after 20 years, we only have 8 critical habitats.
No, but we have Iha, we have 114 legislated protected area. Yung critical habitat usually ano yan presidential proclamation, but we have legislated we have legislated 107 and we are legislating now additional 7. So we have 114 legislated protected area. That's more strong than critical habitat. Usually yung critical habitat, pinoproclaim lang yan ng president. Pero pag legislated ka, legal yon. You cannot destroy them because that will be against the law. So don't say that we only have 8 critical habitat. Like us, the Las Piñas Parañaque Wetland Park was proclaimed by the president as a critical habitat, and then I legislated it into a protected area. So more stronger yung legislated. Kasi that means ano na yon, legal na yon, hindi na yung pwedeng sirain. Kaya yung kung gusto nyong yung mga critical habitat to be more protected, you tell your congressman to legislate it in the lower house and then we will legislate it in the upper house. So,
yes, ma'am, I agree with you.
107 na yan. It's 4.5 million hectares.
Yeah.
All in all. So, hindi totoo yung wawalo. Hindi.
Critical habitats po yun, ma'am. 8, I'm not talking about the protected areas na mas
No,
higher.
but some critical habitat, to be more protected, you have to legislate it. Kasi yung critical habitat, proclamation lang yun Pero pag nilegislate ka, then you're protected under the law. That's mas grabe yun, mas matindi yun. Kaya mas marami tayong protected under the law. As of today, 107 and we're adding 7, so it will be 114 areas. And many of them are 20,000 hectares, 50,000 hectares. So we have a total of 4.5 million hectares as of today.
Yeah, I agree with you, ma'am. Pero meron din kasi sa isang provision ang critical habitats under sa illegal acts. And maganda na i-maximize din itong declaration of critical habitats kasi nga para siyang ginawang no-go zone under the prohibited acts. If one
ayaw mo pa ipa-legislate sa congressman, ba't mo pa i-critical habitat? Mas protected under legislation. No, it's not. It's not.
Dadaan pa ng assessment and all. I used to be with Oceana, so alam po namin yung ang daming kailangan gawin.
Critical habitat, kailangan dumaan sa ganun. Hindi naman pwede mo basta i-declare ng presidente na critical habitat.
Alright, so yun lang po.
To pass through the process.
Yeah, so ang suggestion po namin, ma'am, kasi yun nga, kailangan din yung declaration ng critical habitat para maging operationalize yung legal acts under the prohibited acts. I-define na lang sana yung critical habitat sa batas mismo. So to make it a sort of a no-go zone, a provision similar in mining laws and INAIPAS, which identifies specific areas where certain activities are not allowed. On Section 24, on the issuance of permits, we suggest the putting in a period kasi parang in-erase yata yung periods dun sa effectivity ng permits. Sa BFAR, 3 years yata ang effectivity ng commercial fishing license. We also suggest the inclusion of suspension for those with pending cases and cancellation upon conviction. And applicant should be blacklisted after the 3rd offense siguro. I-add na lang siguro sa yung 3rd offense. And also we suggest and recommend a provision on setting up a database of permittees. So this will be more efficient for those approving the permit based on the applicant's track record. Baka may illegal possession, illegal collection sila, or illegal trade of wildlife. We also recommend a specific period for issuance of guidelines on permit renewal. Siguro 2 years after effectivity, what would be more practical for our implementing agencies to, and also to identify the agency responsible for the implementation, kasi hindi nakasulat doon sa section 24 kung sino ang agency responsible. So that is all, ma'am, for the wildlife wild bird Philippines and for the Philippine Eagle Foundation. Thank you for this opportunity to contribute in this public hearing.
Thank you very much, Attorney Jennifer Ramos. We now would like to hear if former Yusek Asis Perez would want to make a manifestation. Asis Perez. Wala na siya. If Asis Perez will not make a manifestation, then I would like to thank my fellow Senators Subiri and Binay for attending this session, and our resource person and guests who have shared valuable inputs. Your insights contributed to our productive proceedings today. The committee will be forming a technical working group to come up with a fine-tuned substitute bill that will be reported out by the committee. And before we adjourn, some housekeeping. We would like to manifest that I have learned that Senator Revilla has filed an extended producer responsibility bill, and it has yet to be referred to this committee. As soon as it is referred to this committee, the committee will consolidate it with Senate Bill number 1331 to come up with a substitute bill to be reported out. I would like to manifest the inclusion of the aforementioned bill in the forthcoming TWG of the committee on the subject matter. With that, I am now suspending this committee hearing. Thank you very much and a very pleasant good afternoon to all of you. Okay. Thank you,
Maraming
Vic.
salamat po, Madam Chair. Thank you to everyone.
Nancy.
My
Yes,
kumare,
thank you very much.
Mugita, and Jerry, and all our friends from the DNR and the other agencies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.